This is the second in a series of 3 videos about the spiritual integrations I had between 2010 and 2015. 2 months after the episodes with Marge, another integration occurred in a session with a human client named Nonni. Nonni and I initially met when I led a group event at a local Unity or Unitarian church. And she asked me to meet with her for a private session, to which of course I said, sure. So a couple of weeks later, I'm in her home and we're doing the healing thing. And then in the middle of the session, all of a sudden the focus of energies shifted from her on the table in front of me to me, with a similarly heightened intensity that I had with Marge. So as these energies expanded through the space around us, I just let loose a flood of sobs, and there was such awe and humility of being exposed to this kind of holiness, even though I didn't know what it was. I could see and feel myself blown apart in what I later described as like a movie, Terminator sort of slow motion scene where the bomb inside a robot blows up, just this, except it was slow. And in this, I was the one being blown apart, blown up. And I could see muscle and sinew just expand with this internal fiery flow, and these fragments of visual body just went. It was super intense. It didn't last very long. But after that initial thing, there were 3 energies that walked into me, and they just were like 1, 2, 3 in this very purposeful, what's the word I'm looking for? Rhythmic, slow, deliberate motions of walking into me, even though I didn't know what the deliberate nature was. I had no frame of reference, none. But as these 3 energies walked into me, the air began to clear, my snot began to clear, I began to calm down. And as this was happening, there was this kind of peace, that intense swirling peace that the horse trainer had described a couple of months before that with Marge, settled in and around me. And I was like, oh, that's what she was talking about. I mean, sort of. My brain was doing a bazillion things. And I recognized that I had been crying and sobbing, not in fear. I knew I was being touched by the holiest of the holies, by grace and God and others, not just these 3 beings who traipsed through me like, hey. Anyways, Nonni was still on the table. She was still right where she had been before the experience began. And she looked at me and said, do you know who they are? And I was like, nope. I don't even know what happened. Certainly didn't know who they were. And so she pointed to her altar and she said, look there. There they are. And on her altar, which was right next to us, Paramahamsa Yogananda and his Babaji, Sri Yukteswar, and Satya Sai Baba sat looking pretty as they could be, in framed and all of that. And I had a vague awareness of Yogananda because his autobiography of a yogi was one of those 25 or so books that I had bought to learn how to be spiritual. I also didn't read the book, but that's how I knew his teacher. He called his teacher Babaji. And I had sure as hell had never heard of anybody named Sai Baba. Never heard of them. I had no earthly idea why they would have anything to do with me, especially in such a ridiculously fantastical way. Entirely clueless. And 10 years on, and with multiple conversations about Jesus and others later, I still don't really understand. However, some of what I understand is that these 3 men were reportedly a continuation of a particular lineage that includes the dude we call Jesus Christ and Bhagavan Krishna. One who became a guide and the other a conduit for God by another name. Again, no frame of reference. No clue, except this time on the drive home, I didn't say anything like this was not me. I knew that I had clearly become something other than me. Like in that moment, I was not just Ingrid. And I couldn't deny it. And I couldn't share it with anyone, except the woman that I was in the session with. And the only language around it, I was like, okay, so I've become another in their specific lineage, which felt weird. But even then, I was like, well, I can't reach out to other people or tell other people about me because of the scorn. I couldn't handle it. If I couldn't make sense of it for me, how could I make sense of it for anyone else? I didn't even have the language to ask any kind of question beyond, well, what the hell do I do with that? Like, what? And life just kept going until 4 months later in February of 2011, when I went for a 45-minute massage and left nearly 4 hours later. So Ellen, who was my massage therapist at the time, she was trying to work my hips from my back, as they do. And she finally gave up and said, I can't get to it this way. Just roll over. So I rolled over on my back, and as I did so, her hand just casually moved over my heart. And as it did, the room instantaneously, spontaneously filled with hundreds of formerly breathing human energies, and we could both feel them, both of us like, oh shit. And she said, Ingrid, so should I stop? And I said, please, whatever you do, don't move. And then with Ellen's hand on my heart, all of those that joined us began moving into me, one after another, with a gentleness that the previous 2 experiences did not have. There wasn't snot in this one. This time the tears flowed gently. I knew what was happening. I knew who they were. And I knew who they had each been. And it made no sense. I did not know how I knew, but I knew. And the first one in was Jesus, bless his little heart. And he led the way for those behind him, and they came into me one after another. Some I knew in the same way that I knew Jesus was Jesus. Even if I couldn't see faces, I could tell by the music or the rhythms that came with them, that came with their connections to place, to art, to war, to poetry, to math, to language, to water, man and woman, sword and shield, song, Arabic, French, Hebrew. They kept coming. I didn't know all of them, but all of them sure as shit knew me, and they knew that I was their home. And I didn't know what that meant. For hours, they came. And in those hours, I knew with striking clarity that what was with me was the presence and essence of each of those who had walked this path before me, moving into me. And although nothing was spoken to me, There was a clear message of who I am, what I was made for, what this body was made for, although not a why. And it was also clear that it was again, like it had been done before. And I knew that nothing needed to be said because I actually already knew as it was happening. And even though I can't give a clear definition of myself or to myself or anyone else, I just knew. And as I lay naked on this massage table with a heart wide open and my eyes wide open, tears just streaming, gently this time, breathing in a thrum that was shared by all of these multitudes around me, each joining me in a way that can only be described as breathing them in, breath by breath, one by one. I'm naked, Ellen is not, and we're both feeling the power and the peace and the grace, the ferocity and serenity as all of these were merged into me. And as they moved into me over and over again with an increasing intensity and an unmistakable insistence, like it could not be denied, my mouth opened. And what was said was be now, be now, be now, be now, be now, be now. And then with another breath that switched to I am now, I am now, I am now, I am now. First whispered in disbelief and then in awe, and then at some point loudly as this declaration of existence and primacy over anything that was a me, as a just Ingrid, as I knew her to be. And as the energies, moved into me, the density within the air dissipated. And finally it all cleared because they'd all taken up shop in me. Ellen retrieved a bottle of oil and she anointed my feet. And while doing so, said, even though she was not the speaker, become now, for in the light of the one, we all become all that is. Again, we're sobbing. This is happening. And I knew in that moment that I had become what others would call the resurrection, but I'm certainly clearly not the second coming of the Christ. And that each of those, or most of those who had migrated into me had been the Christ, as we call it, of their time and their community. And unlike the previous August and October, this time there were only tears of awe. There was no denying what I experienced. There was no denying me or anything else that had happened, because yet again, there was another witness. Even though there was no manual or no memo given, right? Finally, I found my breath and I had to drive home. The only thing out of my mouth was like, well, what the fuck do I do with that? How was I to live with this knowledge, right? How was I to live with this responsibility? Hello, I am no longer an Ingrid, never mind a just Ingrid. And so I mostly kept my mouth shut. I did share the experience with 2 other people, and was immediately shunned. And so I just learned to keep my mouth shut. Even when speak, child, speak began appearing in my world, I kept my mouth shut. In part because I don't know what anybody else wanted me to say. I still don't. And in part because I was too afraid to face any more condemnation and derision and from others. Even after other people began declaring their experiences of me as Christ or him coming through me, when I was doing the healing work, I kept my mouth shut. Even when people repeatedly said, you just don't know, you just really don't know who you are. I'm like, or who are you exactly? I kept my mouth shut because nobody wants to hear this. Even when I was forced to come out publicly in 2016, I kept my mouth shut afterwards because it turned out that actually no one cared for anything that didn't fit their ideas of how I should be, how I could not possibly actually even be. And I finally had a conversation with Jesus about it in 2021. And I just asked for clarification. I wanted to understand essentially who was what, which whom was most important. Is there a hierarchy? Do I need to know anything more about it? Were they all within me still? And why in the holy hell would he do something like that? Hello? And his response was like, I just thought you could use some good company. I'm like, really? Good company or not, all of them within me, none of us had any idea, except probably Jesus, could have had any idea what was going to unfold in October of 2014. That's the next video.